Grammar Girl here, I'm Mignon Fogarty, and today I have an interview with Grant Faulkner, the Executive Director of National Novel Writing Month, also known as NaNoWriMo. And although NaNoWriMo is in November, the organization also has lots of other events, including one that starts in April, which is why I'm talking with him today. I want you to know about Camp NaNoWriMo because it's not too late to participate. Before we get started, though, I have one quick note. Today's episode is supported by a podcast you'll love called Gastropod. Gastropod is a show about the science and history of food, dedicated to uncovering surprising stories behind the food we eat every day. Learn whether New York City bagels are better because of the water, and hear how the mafia got its start in the lemon groves of Italy. Ever wondered why American mangoes aren't as good as mangoes from around the world? They've got that covered, too. Subscribe to Gastropod wherever you get your podcasts. And now, on to the show. Thanks for being here with me today, Grant.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Mignon.
You bet. So before you tell me about Camp NaNoWriMo, why don't you assume my listeners know nothing about your organization and its history, and why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got started?
Yeah, it's kind of a big story. You know, Chris Beatty, the founder of NaNoWriMo in 1999, he literally kind of woke up one day and decided that he as a lover of reading novels, he wanted to write a novel. And he hadn't taken, writing workshops. He hadn't written a lot of how to write books, but he figured out very correctly that the best way to learn to write a novel was to write one. And so he looked over his bookshelf and kind of took out some of the slimmer volumes and did a rough word count estimate and came up with 50,000 words. And so he figured you can do, he did a little bit of math and figured you can write 50,000 words in a month if you really, dedicate yourself to it and commit yourself. And he invited 20 of his friends, and they met after work in coffee shops and wrote together and did all sorts of kind of writing games, writing challenges. And, the next year, those 20 people, they thought it was a worthwhile thing to do, and Chris thought it was a worthwhile thing to do, and they invited friends, and 150 people joined them the next year. And then they set up a very rudimentary website the following year, and 5,000 people signed up. And then, we've now reached 500,000 people in all of our programs. So it's just kind of spread virally on the internet. And all of those things that Chris was doing in that initial NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, we still do today. We're very much about a goal and a deadline is a creative midwife, as we say. Don't wait to write a novel someday. We want people to write their stories today. And then we have this fantastic, vibrant community, both online and in person. So we have about 1,000 volunteers, which we call municipal liaisons, around the world organizing writing events during November and beyond. And then we work with 1,200 libraries as well to host writing events. So we're a very collaborative organization, and we're really all about just doing big things. So we're really about an empowerment.
And I'm such a fan of the organization. I just think the mission is so great to get people writing. Just sit down and write. It's hard to do. So many people. I think I read a New York Times survey a while back, and 81% of Americans said they want to write a book someday. And the key word there really is the someday part. I think so many people want to do it, but it's they're not making it happen now, and that's what we really believe in, is don't wait until someday, because someday just tends not to happen. Right. And so the organization got started with November being the month in which you write a novel. But now I know you have a bunch of other programs. So why don't you talk about those?
Yeah, we kind of have a branding challenge because we're known as National Novel Writing Month. It's the month part. And we're famous for that. But we have extended our programming, so we're really here year-round. And so after NaNoWriMo, we have I Wrote a Novel, Now What? And we do that in January and February. And it's really focused on helping people, all those next steps of novel writing, all the next steps of the journey. So helping people think about how to revise their novels, think about guiding people through all the publishing labyrinth, whether people want to self-publish or hybrid publish or traditionally publish. And then we do Camp NaNoWriMo. in April and July. And Camp NaNoWriMo, sometimes people think that that's a real camp, that we're actually, have cabins, real live cabins. And I wish we did, but it's virtual. So we have a website for Camp NaNoWriMo. And Camp NaNoWriMo is, the way I like to describe it, it's a more casual version of NaNoWriMo. So writing 50,000 words of a novel is the emphasis in November. But in April and July, it's more open-ended. It's kind of a virtual writing retreat, as we like to describe it. And so that means that you can write anything. You don't have to write a novel. You can revise a novel. This is what I really love when people write their novels in November and revise in April and July. You can write a collection of short stories, poems, flash fiction, scripts, anything. And you can set your goals, too. So you could write 10,000 words, 50,000 words, 100,000 words, or you could write by hours. A lot of different ways to measure it. And then during Camp NaNoWriMo also, we have little online cabins, which is a more kind of intimate experience for people.
Right, and that's why I decided to talk to you now, because Camp NaNoWriMo is coming up in April, and I participated in Camp NaNoWriMo a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I love the virtual cabin experience. I've kept in touch with some of the people who were in my cabin. It was
cool.
Really wonderful to have that supportive small group of people.
Yeah, well, we were super happy. I remember the year that you did it, and it was like a celebrity showed up in our cabin. We're like, Grammar Girl's here.
And I felt like, I can't let down the group, because you have group goals as well as individual goals.
Exactly. And that's one of the beautiful things about it, is that everyone has a goal and that people really want everyone else to succeed. And I think there are very few writing communities that are like that. And so I think, if you go on Twitter, especially during NaNoWriMo, you just see people encouraging other people and rooting them on, absolute strangers. Just the fact that they're doing NaNoWriMo brings people together.
Right. And then besides Camp NaNoWriMo, I believe you have things in schools, right? Things for students?
We do. We actually have our Young Writers Program, which is also, it's a separate program and it's a separate website. We just launched a huge, new, wonderful website, and it's a year-round program as well. And so our most popular time for our Young Writers Program is November, just like with National Novel Writing Month. But we do writing contests and a variety of things on the Young Writers Program site year-round. So we're really extending all of our programming to provide year-round support. And we're actually going to launch a huge, new, wonderful NaNoWriMo website this year as well.
Oh, that's a big undertaking.
It is. It's going to be super wonderful. I'm calling it Fitbit for novelists. And the reason I do that is because we're providing all of these, writing tracking tools. We're really deepening that and providing an array of ways to kind of explore your writing life and hold yourself accountable and reach new and bigger goals. So I think it's going to be really fun. And I should say that we existed before Fitbit. So I think Fitbit is kind of NaNoWriMo for walkers.
Yes, that's going to be so great. I confess that I have tried to hack multiple walking and running tracking apps to track my writing, and none of them work very well for that.
I know.
So I finally gave up.
This is what I feel like. I feel like all of the tracking oriented sites and organizations in the world, we need to have one big conference and come up with like some tools that span different sorts of goals and behaviors.
Right, yeah. So you've got all these great events that create enthusiasm about writing, mostly fiction writing, but also other kinds of writing, like you said, poetry. I think I worked on my calendar in my cabin. So, you've been doing this for quite a while. So tell me, what are sort of the big picture things you've learned that are the best advice that you can give to writers?
Yeah, I think we think about this a lot because we have... this year for NaNoWriMo on our adult site, the main site, we'll have somewhere between 300,000 and 350,000 people sign up, and they want to write a novel. Of that number, about 15% of them will hit 50,000 words. So it's always our goal to raise that number, and it's a really interesting challenge. And I think we try different things every year. We have a whole kind of gamification system on the site where people get badges for different milestones. I think that the key to success in NaNoWriMo, we have this discussion about whether you should plan your novel, meaning write a big long outline, or just pants it, just show up and write. And I think everybody has to find their own creative process that works for them. but I do think some preparation is really important. And that doesn't have to be preparation on your novel per se, although I think that helps. But I think just coming up with, like, for instance, a time management strategy. Most people, we find it takes them about 2 hours to write 1,700 words. And so you have to really think about your lives. I mean, most of us are busy people. I've never heard anyone say they're not a busy person. and so no matter how busy you are, you have to think about how can you open up a chunk of 2 to 3 hours a day to reach 50,000 words. And so that's one thing I really emphasize is to plan beforehand. Don't just jump in and because I think if you just jump in and do it, and don't even know how many hours it takes, you'll probably drop off after a few days. And then when you fall further and further behind the word count, it's harder to come back. And that's another thing that we actually say. We're like, if you get sick or have a big work project and have to take a week off or can't write for a week, don't quit. It's the main thing we want is for people to write. So just get back and set a new goal, some goal that makes you come back and write. And sometimes people have these amazing heroic comebacks. They'll write 10,000 words in a day and finish. So those are just a couple.
And November is always hard because Thanksgiving falls in there too.
It depends on your Thanksgiving strategy. If you're someone who travels for Thanksgiving or someone who hosts Thanksgiving, yeah, it can count against you. If you're a person like me who does neither, Thanksgiving is my comeback weekend. I block it out, and I use that long weekend to really catch up on my word count. So, but you're right. Everyone has a different sort of relationship, I think, to every month. We're always getting asked, like, why do you do it in November? And, every month poses some hazard, like if we did it in February, there'd only be 28 days. There's always seemingly a holiday in every month that takes somebody out.
And I guess it's a great excuse to hide from your family for a couple of hours.
It can.
I have a deadline, sorry.
Exactly. I think it's come in as a really handy tool during awkward Thanksgiving dinners.
Yeah, and I do tend to get overstimulated and need to sneak away and have some quiet time during holidays. So yeah, that would be a good excuse.
It's a good excuse to find some solitary time because writers tend to be introverts. And so, yeah. Actually, that's a key to NaNoWriMo's success, too, I think, is announcing it to the world so that everyone knows that you have that goal. And then when you see people, if you announce it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, they'll ask you how you're doing. And this is actually a great behavioral change strategy for any behavior. You don't want to say, I dropped out. You want to say, oh, I'm at 30,000 words and I'm going to finish. So it's just like announcing it to people builds in a system of accountability. Also, just like to what you're saying, like telling your friends and family what you're doing and just asking them for support for a month is also a great way to finish. To have people rooting you on and saying, oh, I'll make dinner tonight. I'll wash the dishes so that you have some writing time. So. And
what is your advice for revision those January, February months when you have this really ugly, probably, manuscript that you can barely even call a novel because it still needs so much work? Yeah. Like, what is your advice then for people?
I think first it's like a kind of emotional acceptance that you have created something that's very messy, but it's not just your novel that's messy. Every rough draft in the history of the world has been messy. And it takes a lot of, you have to have a lot of fortitude to jump in and to revise it. And revising is much different than writing the rough draft. I think they're equally important in the end, but it's very different. And so, and there are, just hundreds of different ways you can go about revising. So we provide a lot of resources and webcasts and podcasts and try to support people to find the revision techniques that work for them. But I do think it's important to, after you've written the rough draft during November, is to take some time off. I think this is the best revision advice ever, and really distance yourself from your writing and then come into it new. So when you open up that messy novel in January or February, you can almost, I heard this too recently, is just to pretend like somebody else wrote it. And so pretend that you're reading somebody else's draft, and then it makes it easier to kind of clean up and provide those, kind of harsher or more, strenuous editorial demands. Also, like knowing, like for instance, like since you're a grammar girl, I don't think that second pass at revision, that's not when you should be too worried about getting all the commas in the correct place. It's great if you do, but I think that when you're reading that rough draft, you're really thinking a bigger picture, kind of like story structure, development, characterization, all those things. You're wanting to go deeper into the story. And then I think when you really want to clean it up in terms of like copy editing, proofing, that comes later.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You shouldn't worry about the commas and the capitalization, even the spelling, until you have the story down, until you think it's pretty much done. And that's the time to then copy edit, which is a completely different kind of editing from, developmental editing.
Yeah, it's a different part of your brain. So if a writer like me, sometimes I need to clean up things just to feel good about them and create some momentum. So I will, do some cleanup, but that's not my priority.
Yeah. Well, to wrap up, why don't you share some of the biggest success stories? Give people hope that if they participate in Camp NaNoWriMo in April, or maybe wait until July or November, that there are people who have had great successes coming out of your programs.
There are. It's amazing. I recently met with the author Jasmine Guillory, who's written several wonderful romance novels. Actually, one of them was just chosen by Reese Witherspoon for her book club. And she had her first taste of NaNoWriMo during Camp NaNoWriMo one year, during April. We have Sarah Gruen with Water for Elephants, Erin Morgenstern with Night Circus, Marissa Meyer has written. She participates in NaNoWriMo every year, and if she has to write one of her novels that in a non-November month, she does it NaNoWriMo style. As does Hugh Howey. He wrote the Wool series. Let me see. Rainbow Rowell wrote Fangirl. So there's just a long list of best-selling authors who've participated in NaNoWriMo. Even Alexander Chee has. I could go on and on, to tell you the truth. We've had thousands of novels that have been published through NaNoWriMo.
That's amazing. So listeners, take note. I know that a lot of you are in that group of people who want to write a novel someday.
Yeah.
And I encourage you to try to start to maybe use this opportunity, maybe do it on your own. But I found NaNoWriMo to be, and Camp NaNoWriMo to be, just a helpful and supportive environment.
Yeah, and here's what I want your listeners to do also, is that after you participate in Camp and NaNoWriMo, I want you to write Mignon and tell her to come back and write her novel with us. Because I know that you made some progress during the one camp you participated in. So I
did, and then I had that big mess, and I couldn't bring myself to fix it.
Yeah, so, you can, Mignon. You're gonna be up there with all the authors I just listed someday.
I hope so. Yeah, it was. My family had been reading it, and they're like, "It's great. Oh, this is wonderful. Wait, oh my gosh, what happened? Oh, this is off the rails." It started out so strong.
Yeah, you got to go a little off the rails, I think, especially in those first drafts, and then kind of bring it back in. But I think NaNoWriMo, it's also it's and this is how I actually started participating. It's a wonderful experiment with your creative process, and so I think every writer should do it just once, just for that sake. What's it like to set this like really huge goal and to try to reach it? And I find that it influences so many other things I do in life. Yeah, and so I'm always thinking about one of our staff person. He has a saying about a month-olution. He likes to set monthly goals, and I think that's such a good way to be accountable. I think sometimes when we set annual or yearly goals, that's just too much of a time period, too big of a time period. And if we and this is like what NaNoWriMo is about too, is take that big goal and break it down into smaller chunks, and then you're just focusing on what you need to do the next day or the next week.
Right. Well, yeah. I thought you were going to say, I don't want to hear from listeners encouraging me to do it. I want to hear from listeners who tell me they heard this podcast and then they decided to participate and loved it. So that's what I want to hear.
Okay, I want to hear that too. And then write Mignon and say to pick up that novel that went off the rails.
Grant is always encouraging everyone to write because that's what he does.
Yeah, it's true. That's our mantra. Everyone has a story to tell, and I believe that.
Absolutely. So tell listeners where they can get more information.
Yeah. So we have a separate website for Camp NaNoWriMo. It is campnanowrimo.org. And if you don't know how to spell NaNoWriMo, because sometimes it gets a little weird, it's NaNoWriMo. We also have the NaNoWriMo.org website. And if you sign up on the NaNoWriMo.org website, you can get our monthly newsletter and all of our communications about different events and things we do throughout the year.
Wonderful. Well, I know you're really busy this time of year, so I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
It's always fun to talk with you. So thank you so much for having me, Mignon.
I'm Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl, and author of 7 books, including the New York Times bestseller, Grammar Girl's Quick and Dirty Tips for Better Writing. This show is part of the Quick and Dirty Tips podcast network, and you can find articles that go with each episode at quickanddirtytips.com. That's all. Thanks for listening.